China hit back on US tariffs within minutes. A 10% tariff on all Chinese imports going to the US kicked in 1 minute past midnight Eastern Time, and Beijing hit back immediately with a 15% duty on US coal and LNG and 10% for crude oil, farm equipment and trucks. Those duties don't actually kick in until next Monday, though, giving some time for negotiation. Janet Moy is head of market analysis at RBC Brewin Dolphin. What do you make of China's relatively limited response so far?
Well, first of all, I think it's clear that China will go for tit for tat when faced with U.S. Tariff threats. And secondly, you mentioned that these measures are actually quite mild. And the fact is that China exports way more to the U.S. than otherwise. So there's not a lot of button that China can actually push. So the measures are likely to be, of limited nature anyway. And China doesn't really import a lot of crude or natural gas from the U.S., whereas I think the pain point would be on agriculture, because that is always a political aspect, and the U.S. farmers will suffer and the producers there. And I think the export control on rare earths, it could be potentially more powerful if that potentially can be intensified, because it's hard to actually substitute those products from China, for example. But you mentioned very interestingly, these don't start immediately, which actually allows some potential for negotiation, given that the two leaders are going to talk. But I would say we shouldn't have too high expectation on what's happened to Canada and Mexico, because ultimately Mexico and Canada are allies, traditional allies of the U.S., whereas for China and U.S., the relationship is always kind of rivalry. And so I don't think we should be too complacent about potential de-escalation so quick yet.
Do you think, though, that China is seeking a compromise?
To be honest, I think it's really hard to say, but I would believe that the China's stance would be going for retaliation, even though, as I said, the measures could be quite limited, but because I don't think China would want to be perceived as weak at this point. But equally, I also believe that actually, of course, the trade tariffs will hurt Chinese companies and it's not great for net export. But at the end of the day, I think China has been diversifying its export destination. And as a share of GDP, actually, China's export to the US now is only about less than 3%, which has declined very significantly since 2018, for example. So I think there is economic pain, but I think China would be able to stomach that. And especially they have a lot of plans to shift more to domestic consumption, for example.
How vulnerable is the Chinese economy, though? You mentioned that the importance of exports to the US has decreased, but that's in the context of a much weaker Chinese economy than during Trump's first term, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I expect if there's no potential for the escalation after the phone call, if these tariffs go ahead, and remember the US has mentioned that if countries retaliate, they will actually further intensify the tariff. So we could be in a series of retaliation going forward. So that is not great, of course. But I also believe that the stance on fiscal stimulus on China has been it is willing to do more, and I think it has been holding up its dry powder. Because they want to observe what is going to happen with trade. And if we have more certainty that this is going to escalate for real, then I presume that in 2025 there would be more forceful measures to support domestic consumption and shifting further away from reliance on net export, for example.
Are we also going to see China developing trading relationships further with other countries, as you mentioned, to move away from the US and perhaps also its allies as a key market?
Yes, I think actually this could potentially be a good opportunity for China to improve its influence on other countries and to empower, for example, intra-region or ultra-region trading relationship. Because at a time when the US is kind of perceived as bullying other countries, including its allies, China has the potential to step up and show the world that it is actually open for trade and being up for grabbing the geopolitical influence that U.S. has seen to kind of give up in a global context. So I believe there is some opportunity there, particularly would be relevant in Asia or potentially even to European Union, where currently Trump is threatening tariffs on Europe.
That was Janet Moy of RBC Brewin Dolphin. Don't forget you can watch more videos on Reuters.com.